song of the last gig of the last real rock and roll band.
It's just this moment, just this crystalline, distilled song that kicks you in the guts about being the outsider.
Play my pal, man. So good.
We had a bunch of skinheads there who were chucking a lot of bottles and lit cigarettes at us, and it was better than a lukewarm reception.
And I was just amazed by the sonic energy and the power and the awesome, monstrous abomination of motor-fueled rock and roll.
We were perverts. It's amazing we lasted as long as we did.
For more than 25 years, Australian underground rock fans have marvelled at the song My Pal, recorded by a band of teenagers with the audacity to call themselves God. The story starts in Melbourne in the 1980s when the band were barely in their teens.
Hi, this is Matty Whittle, formerly of the band God. We sit here in the idyllic surroundings of Upwey in the Dandenong Ranges on the outskirts of Melbourne. Sean Greenway and I were in a band previous to God called Foot and Mouth, and we used to play a lot of gigs around the punk scene, and especially at a pub called the Sydenham Hotel in Richmond. That was around the time we met Joel Silbersher and Tim Hemmensley, and they'd both played a bit of music before.
I'm Joel Silbersher, a man of lettuce, sparkling raconteur. Maybe when I was 13 or something, I started writing really shitty punk songs with emotional lyrics about girls, even though I didn't know anything about them and I'd never really touched one or anything. But Tim was in bands when he was like 10, you know. He was like playing in front of people at pubs in punk bands when he was 10 years old.
I'm Bruce Milne. I had the Ogogo record label, the label that God recorded for. I was working at Greville Records, and I remember Joel and Tim. I don't remember Matty or Sean. Tim used to come down with his mum when they were really young, like 11, 12, and both of them had very strong opinions even then on records. I remember a little later on, Joel started a fanzine called Man Doesn't Live on Eno Alone. He'd come in and sort of lecture me about which records in the shop were crap and which ones weren't. I was always impressed because he had really great opinions, but it was just amazing to hear someone who could hardly see over the counter sort of with such opinions at such a young age.
Melbourne was so snotty when we started. It's really disillusioning to realise how straight these punk people were, and all the rules that they had that you were meant to live by, and all this PC kind of shit. And also the other thing is just Nick Cave impersonators everywhere. We just wanted to do, not that we sound as good as Pierce or Motorhead or the Dictators, but we wanted to do something like that. Have some fun and stir some shit. Just annoy the punks.
We sort of had several different bands going at once with only about sort of 6 or 7 different members in them, and one of the bands we had going was called the Hairy Brain. At the time we just considered that the sort of fun, jokey sort of band, that we weren't taking that seriously. But in fact that was the one that ended up really sticking, and we went with that and changed the name of the band to God, and the other bands ended up falling by the wayside, and we kept going with that.
Some people might find your name a little bit offensive. Is your intention to be controversial?
No. We share the same fundamental beliefs as most Christians, in that we believe in the one true God, but the difference is that we know that the attention should be focused on us, these angelic faces, rather than up there. We're the only God, we were the only God, and we will forever be the only God.
Hi, my name's Andy Turner. I mixed God for pretty much all of their live existence. Each member had a certain kind of presentation. Joel was the lippy, sounded like an inner city kid. He wasn't, but he sounded like a hip inner city kid, very intelligent. Sean was a kind of cheeky little guy in the background who would just burst out with little interjections, very funny. Matty was much more down to earth and serious with his deep voice, but so dry. His humour was incredibly dry and his songs were fantastic. And Tim was the self-mythologising butcher boy. He had this incredible awareness of the mythology of rock and roll and how to create a mythology.
I've been rocking out since I was 10. I first picked up a bass and I got up there and went... like that, and I was just amazed by like the sonic energy and the power and the awesome, monstrous abomination of motor-fueled rock and roll fury which just spewed out of my amp. And since then, I've been trying to recapture that first violent awakening into the world. And succeeding very well with God.
Well, I was about 15 and I was the oldest in the band, so Tim was the youngest. He was probably about 14 when we started. Yeah, well, it was difficult because, we couldn't just rush out and get a job and get our own stuff or, our own decent equipment. We were very much at the mercy of whatever we could scab off other bands. Yeah, we had to depend on parents mostly, especially Joel's late dad, I should say, Alex. He was a great help to us, did a lot of driving around for us, and without that we just couldn't play.
First we should stir up a bit of shit, and then we should introduce the band. Over here on guitar, Mr. Joel Rock and Roll! And on the drums, fuck you very much. On drums and bass, that absolute master magician and musician, Matthew Shithouse Whittle. Yeah! Woo! And over on the bass guitar and rhythm guitar and occasional backing vocals, Mr. Sean Scorpion. Whoa! Greenway! Yeah, the tempo! More claps than you. Yeah! And there's only one member of the band left.
He doesn't matter that much.
Who could that be?
Fuck him off. Fuck that guy off.
Who could that be? They call me the Meat Cleaver! Boy!
I used to have a joke that Joel's dad used to come up to me at gigs. He was a lovely man and sort of go, "How's the mixing?" And we'd have a joke that I'd say, "Damage control." They were a band that could swing wildly, and I mean wildly, from the most intensely wonderful, playing fantastic songs coming together beautifully, to the most wayward, out-of-tune, raucous, drunken, cacophonous mess you could imagine.
If you got us on a good night, it was great. We could, if everything clicked, but it was just too hit and miss. It was very unpredictable.
We have guys who are trying to put on a show worthy of Kiss Alive, and they all have practice amps of about 30 watts, a drum kit that was held together by Blue Tack, maybe. Yet they were doing the poses, but the sound was like little tin boxes.
If we could borrow gear off another band who we were playing with and we had some idea of how to get it to sound good, then things tended to work for us a bit better. Some nights we sucked. We were just bloody awful. It was just an absolute bloody disaster.
Quite a few shows with a number of other bands. How are they treating you?
They thought that we were just an average bunch of teenagers, but they were wrong, and soon enough they knew it.
I don't mind supporting, really. I don't mind supporting. I sort of feel...
Well, because we're not that proud. We're supporting. It's like we're supporting.
The thing is,
it's like they collapse. We're holding them up, really.
Well, yeah, we're supporting, but also...
We're supporting in every sense of the word.
We're on first. We're on first. We're not on third.
We like to give young bands a go.
First. We're number one. We're the first act on. You walk into the gig, man, and you're getting hip to the sounds and the beat, and you're jiving, and you see a bunch of hip dudes like us up on stage getting really skeezed out, getting really filth, and you just say...
Getting really weak.
And you just say, yeah!
A lot of people do that.
I'm Leaping Larry L. I was a long-term presenter and still am on public radio, and I worked at Go-Go Records and also became a fan of the band and later the manager of the band God. Their parents were supporting them through all of this too. Initially they were underage. The parents would take them to gigs and have to stay there, and they would drive them. They were their roadies was the parents and a mate.
Hi, I'm Sean's mum. My name's Tricia Greenway. Indeed, I spent a fair bit of time with them in my little car, stoked up to the roof virtually with gear, and then I'd take them off to some of the various inner city pubs, and I'd sit there in the dark and watch them. that we got to be fairly well known, and even the Vice Squad used to pop in occasionally and just look up and see me sitting up the back and give me a nod, and then off they'd go.
Any one of you friends want to buy us a beer? Oh, come on.
Hi, my name's Trevor Block. I was a small part of the God family for several years in the mid to late 80s. One of the things that was a feature of their live shows is that they would finish a song and three of them would put down what they were playing and go and change. So Jim would put down the bass and go and sit behind the drums. And so whatever momentum you had from that last song they just played, they would often kind of lose the crowd a bit or start back-chatting the crowd while they had to, put on their new instruments and retune them. And so you had these little 2-3 minute gaps in between every song.
This song's not do you want to hear My Pal?
Because this band has become mythologised through My Pal, people may often think that the gigs were always packed and filled with fans and everyone was pro-God and loving every minute of it. At the time, they would play gigs to sometimes virtually no one. I have a tape of a gig in St Kilda where they would finish all their songs to maybe 2 people. So they're doing their shtick and their routine, and 2 people, 3 people, me. I think I was the loudest one there, the mixer. They hadn't become this My Pal giant. They were a bunch of young guys who were known for doing appalling gigs as well as great ones.
But the fortunes of the band were about to change. In 1987, the 4 guys in God got together with producer Simon Grounds in his home studio and recorded their first 7-inch single, My Pal. The song was written and sung by a 15-year-old Joel Silbersher.
It was extremely easy. It was the first good song I ever wrote, and it was extremely easy to write the music. I thought up that line that goes through the whole thing and was trying to think of another one, and then went, oh no, if you just do this over and over, that's a song. It's a whole piece of music. And then I had the You're My Only Friend, You Don't Even Like Me bit, but then it took a while to erode the other lyrics into it. It's just funny when people think it's about some specific incident or something. Cause you go, okay, got enough words now.
That recording was actually just intended to be a demo. It was a fairly low-budget recording. Joel's dad put up the money for that, and it wasn't a very laboured-over process. I think Joel may have gone back and redone the vocals for My Pal on one occasion. I think he did an initial vocal take he wasn't happy with, went back and redid it. Other than that, there wasn't much to it, really. It wouldn't only cost a couple of $100 to record that song.
Actually, the first mix of My Pal, which I don't know what the issue was, it was something about test pressing. But the first mix we had, which I've never been able to get a hold of again, was better than the one that's on the record. Had a deeper snare sound and just a bit of weird sort of reverb on that feedback guitar that I do.
I mean, the great thing about the song is it's got a killer riff, and then once the vocals come in, they just sound so real. It doesn't sound like a constructed song. It's got that brutal honesty about it.
This is Double J, the story of God, My Pal, and everything that came after.
Armed with the My Pal recording, Joel headed into the Orgogo record store to play the song for Bruce Milne.
It's one of those stories where the history I've rewritten at some stage, because I thought I was in the shop by myself on a Saturday. I do remember playing the tape. It was a cassette in those days, of course, and I don't think I even got towards the end of it before I just said, look, I've got to put this out. And so there was no doubt it was going to be a renowned record, if not a necessarily a huge seller. It was just one of those records that's the reason why you start a record label, is for those sort of golden moments.
Well, that was the first place I took it, and I had quite a few friends who had little labels. I knew anybody would put out that record. Just a really catchy, really great sounding song. But Bruce was the first person who played it to, and he just automatically was really excited about it. Dave Lang was probably working out the back of Orgogo at that time and would have gone, fuck it.
My name's Dave Lang. I worked for Orgogo back in the God days for a few years, and after that I had a label called Dogmeat Records and released some records by the Powder Monkeys, Hoss and the Freeloaders, featuring ex-members of God. I think one of the things with this song too is that it kind of crosses across so many musical boundaries. My Pal, for indie kids it's an indie song, for punk people it's a punk song, for rock and roll people it's a rock and roll song. It can be a pop song if you want it to be. It just seems to appeal to just everybody, in the alternative kind of world. It just covers all those bases.
With the song ready to go, Bruce got to work on its release.
Oh, it was pretty simple. I mean, a lot of it was negotiating with the various parents, because I think they would have still been 15 at the time. And, really great parents, but, they're obviously concerned about, what does this mean, our kids, having a recording deal and touring and, they've got to go to school. And I think we all worked it out. Well, obviously we worked it out.
I had some involvement with Orgogo at the time, in that I kind of worked there occasionally and hung out there a lot. I don't recall why he asked me to write the press release for it, but I was happy to do it, and reading it now, I would stand by every word of it. I think my favourite line is this: they've been around for nearly a year without a hit single, and they should have one, so we put it out. And they agree, but then these are four of the most self-inspired, self-congratulatory guys you could ever hope to meet, and they deserve everything they talk themselves into.
The very first pressing of the single would have only been 500, I assume. That was with an orange cover, and I think it had Joel's parents' address on the back, and they didn't like that, so I think we had to texture it out on every single one of them.
I assume Joel didn't ask his parents if he could put their address in fairly big lettering on the back of the record, so I don't know if they ended up having God groupies camping out on their front lawn, but maybe they were scared of that.
Yes, the fans are waiting behind me in anticipation of our first live band. They're a new Melbourne band who've just, released their first single on an independent label, currently number 5 on the alternative charts. Here they are, God, with their new single, My Pal. Go for God.
That was a complete nightmare, the factory performance. Knowing what they were like, I made them stay at my apartment the night before so I could keep an eye on them, because we had to be down there at like 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, we'd been up all night at that stage, and we thought we were going to be pre-recording it, but by the time we got there, they told us, no, you're going to do it live, and we thought, okay. But we weren't in the best state.
Tim stayed in the next apartment block with Trevor. In the morning, got everyone up, got some coffee into them, ready to go next door, and Trevor announces that Tim isn't there. He turns up sometime a little bit later, completely drunk, which was my fear, which is why I was keeping them here, so that nothing would happen.
Tim stayed up all night with his girlfriend. I was banging on the toilets of the ABC while he was chundering like 10 minutes before we were due on camera, and he was completely green.
We got him down to the ABC studios, but we had to sort of get him into the green room without anyone seeing us, because there was no way they were going to let him play. And then we had him in the toilet sort of throwing up and trying to get coffee down him. And if you look at the performance, Tim is definitely under the weather.
Although he is just a rock and roll imp when you see it. He's a figure of fun. Anytime a camera or a microphone was anywhere near him, he would just instantly switch on. He's a born show business guy, unlike the rest of us. The song kind of went okay. It didn't seem so great at the time, but now it stands up all right. I was pretty annoyed when the stagehand, who it turns out was the guitar player of the band The Shindiggers, ran across the stage while we were playing, like in front of the band, stood on my fuzz pedal. So, yeah, in the middle of that, in the quiet bit, you just hear this...
The tacky 80s video effects, and I liked when I knocked my cymbal over and the cameraman caught it. That was lucky he was standing there, because I would have been a bit screwed otherwise.
There it is. God, the band we promised you, God, and that's the band we hope you weren't disappointed with something a little bit more.
The cult around My Pal kept growing, with thousands of copies being sold. The song was huge in Melbourne and hit a chord with rock fans right around Australia. To this day, the song is held up as an underground Australian classic, and it's passed between music fans with equal parts reverence and excitement. There were cover versions by my band, Magic Dirt, and more recently, Violent Soho. Even Bonnie Prince Billy has played a cover of My Pal live.
You're my only friend. You don't even like me.
But at the time, the teenagers in God, who had always kicked against what was popular, started to get pissed off about all the attention on only one of their songs.
Man, I was made to feel ashamed of that song. I mean, I understand that the other guys, and me a bit as well, were sort of irritated that audiences were... Like, you'd play it, and sometimes a few songs in, then they go, My Pal! Again, you go, yeah, we opened up with that one, you know. We stopped playing it in political revolt. Yeah, I was made fun of. I was kind of made to feel ashamed of that song for a while in the band that played it, you know.
Play My Pal, man. So good. We dance with a thrash every week, man.
If things really take off with the band and there's possible tours and whatnot, would you leave school?
No.
That's definite. Why not?
Kids should stay at school, otherwise you end up on the street taking drugs.
Mr. T taught us that.
It's no good.
That guy cares. I mean, like, he may be this big ornery looking guy with a mohawk, but you can tell there's just something in that gleam in his eyes.
We don't do drugs because drugs are bad. And if you do drugs,
then you are mad. Don't be a man and not a mouse. Rock and roll is really grouse. Hey, get hip, get God, get school, get rocked. That's what it's about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Past My Pal, just about every move that we made was almost perversely designed to bring us undone. It's sort of funny when dickheads say, oh, you were kind of like the Silverchair of your day. We go, no, we were not. You know, just no comparison. Yeah, and we were perverts. It's amazing we lasted as long as we did.
After My Pal took off, God recorded a mini-album with new songs called Rock is Hell that showed off the songwriting of all the members of the group, including drummer and guitarist Matty Whittle.
A lot of people didn't like Rock is Hell because they sort of expected it to be like My Pal, and it just wasn't. It was more our, you know, a lot of the stuff on that record was more of our send-up, humorous sort of stuff, and it wasn't much like My Pal at all, so we got a bunch of bad reviews for it. As was often the case with us, we were in a state of democratic gridlock, and we couldn't figure out, or we couldn't agree on what the cover was going to be, and I think Bruce from A Go-Go just became exasperated with this whole debacle and said, look, all four of you go and design your own covers and we'll put out 4 different versions of the record. And that was just for the sake of expediency, really. I think it was, in retrospect, it was a bit of a stupid idea.
We tried to make it in the end into some sort of a PR stunt, but it really was, we had the record and could not get them to agree on a cover. It went on, in my memory, for months. So eventually I said, look, we'll do 4 different covers, you can each do your own. and that was the way to break the impasse and get the bloody thing out.
I don't want to give you the impression it was an unworkable situation. It was never quite unworkable, but in terms of actually getting to a decision, it could be difficult, and you probably were going to have one of them at least out of the four, even after a lot of talk about something that had his nose out of joint about it. And in terms of getting to a pattern of decisions that were for the ongoing good of the band, and again, it was hard to get that sort of pattern of behaviour when you've got four guys pulling in opposite directions.
With the confusion of rock is hell behind them, God hit the road to Sydney to record their debut album, For Lovers Only. Or Go-Go label boss Bruce Milne was relieved.
We finally recorded a complete album, and there was a lot of interest. So I had a licensing deal in England, Germany. Did I have one in America? Anyway, a bunch of licensing deals. Got all the parts off to everyone. Everyone put the record in production.
That was a pretty different proposition. That was the full 24-track setup. We did that with Tim Pittman, who was the Hard-Ons manager at the time, and had also co-produced their stuff, so we'd heard the Hard-Ons records and liked what they'd done, so I think we ended up borrowing a lot of their gear as well when we were recording up there. So we got to spend a bit more time, a bit more money on that, so it's quite a different sound. But we were all pretty happy with how For Lovers Only turned out.
Double J.
Man.
That's Snake Charmer, a song from the God album For Lovers Only. That's the only full album the band ever recorded, and one they didn't get much of a chance to promote. The disagreements between band members had not stopped.
In my memory, a week before or a week after the record came out, and I suspect it was a week before, the band announced they were splitting up, and I had some really unhappy record companies around the world.
We had a record ready to come out, and we couldn't even wait around. We couldn't even wait around for that to come out before we broke up, but we had some gigs booked, and I just said to Tim, look, why don't you stick around for these gigs and then we'll just stop.
We'd decided by that stage to not carry on. Well, we'd been together about 3 years at that point, so we thought, let's just do this gig and finish it off, and we never played together after that.
I give you the greatest rock and roll band in the world, the true Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, in their last show ever, God!
It was a big moment, sad and a big moment. This was one time when the crowd was fully on their side. It was packed. They played really, really well. They didn't do as much of their comedy shtick as perhaps they used to. They just got into the music more and just really let it go. They borrowed the amps of the Seminal Rats, so they really actually they did have big sounding amps, and they could really sound like a big rock and roll band with a great drum kit. The crowd was really behind them.
This is the last song of the last gig of the last real rock and roll band.
I was, torn. I thought the gig was fantastic, but at the end of it, I was had a real sense of letdown that because there was so much promise in that band. Really, if they could have stayed together, which I don't think they could have, I really think they could have made more amazing albums.
It's great. It's a beautiful feeling when it finished. I thought it went for 3 years, but it felt like a lot. And we were kids, but you take your stupidity pretty seriously when you're a teenager.
It did go to our heads a little bit, which wasn't that great, really. I think, that sort of a little bit of success can affect people even when they're adults, but when you're teenagers, it's even worse. It's easy to get sort of carried away with the whole rock star fantasy of it, and I don't think that sort of way of thinking really does you any favours, especially as a teenager.
I think they broke up because they couldn't agree on anything. They all had such strong opinions, and they really needed to form 4 different bands, which is exactly what they did straight away.
I know they all had other ideas for other things they wanted to do that perhaps they couldn't fit into the God structure, and clearly Tim wanted to take his music in a very definite direction. You hear what he did with Bored and with the Powder Monkeys. It's a world away than anything that I think God would have wanted to do or been able to do. Similarly, Joel, he's gone off and done just a lot of different stuff. Sean's Yesmen were a great band. I think they only did the one CD, that one album, but they were very much a straightforward rock and roll band. Matty, I think, gave up music for a while. Well, he taught music or something in Russia, I think. But I think he gave up performance, playing music for quite some time afterwards. Whether he'd been soured or whether he was just sick of it, I don't know.
In fact, Matty Whittle from God would eventually form a couple of bands, one called Offal Pump and another called Source. And Sean Greenway from God would spend time in the Freeloaders, as well as fronting his own band, the Yesmen. But it was Joel Silbersher and Tim Hemmensley who would take their experience in God onto greater heights in their new bands.
Well, all of them made music after that's worth hearing, but 2 of them, in my opinion, had bands that were extraordinary, and still are. One of them still going, Hoss, which is Joel's band. And there were the Powder Monkeys, who were one of the greatest Australian rock bands ever, without a doubt. They were just a force of nature.
Straight after God, bass player Tim Hemmensley joined Geelong band Bored for a couple of years, before he and the band's guitarist John Nolan left to form their new group, the Powder Monkeys. I'm a huge fan of the Powder Monkeys, and I think they were an absolutely brutal live rock and roll band, as their friend and fan Leap and Larry L can attest.
There's very few bands that you think of, the component instruments, sometimes including the vocalist, was so distinctive. It's the action of the 3 or 4 instruments together that make a mechanism, I'd call it, that's completely unique and that no one else does, but is entirely beholden to that band. And the Powder Monkeys were like that. It sounded like a wall. In a pleasant way, if this is possible, a large brick wall constantly falling on your head throughout the song. That's what it sounded like.
Played bass like Lemmy or something. Just an absolutely full-on, powerful bass sound, and he could almost play lead bass too. He was incredible. A similar approach to his singing, and he was a great songwriter. His dad's a poet, and I think just his use of language, just the way he used words was incredible, and that certainly came to the fore in the Powder Monkeys.
To me, Tim Hemmensley was just like this pocket rocket. He had this beautiful, huge voice, really melodic and pitch perfect, actually. Even though he had a graveliness to it, there was this insane power and delicate beauty. Tim was charming and engaging, and he was volatile and wild, and I just loved him. Everybody loved him, and he was the perfect frontman.
Tim was the sweetest guy, but he could get angry and opinionated over the craziest things. And later on, when I had the licence on the tote, all the staff loved Tim, but I think Tim got banned from the tote more than anyone else because he was always bailing someone up against a wall because they'd dissed one of the bands he liked or had some opinion that Tim disagreed with, and there was always that sort of threat of violence over some of the silliest things with Tim.
The Powder Monkeys right there with In the Doldrums from their album Time Wounds All Heals, recorded at the height of their powers in 1995. Their label boss at Dogmeat Records, Dave Lang, remembers this time.
Obviously in Melbourne, the reputation has been maintained and, partly due to Tim's death, it's become this thing that's grown over the years and they're seen as some kind of, rock and roll institution or something in Melbourne. But they were a fantastic band, I thought at the time they were like pretty much the best band in the world, I thought they just had the songs, they were unbelievably powerful live. They were pretty impossible to kind of push them in any direction they didn't want to go.
In 2003, Tim Hemmensley, who had been struggling with his addiction for years, died from a heroin overdose. The same way his God bandmate Sean Greenway had passed several years before.
I wasn't surprised, I guess. Sean from God had died, I guess, a year or two earlier. That was much more of a surprise. With Tim, there was kind of an inevitability about it, maybe. Yeah, but it was, it just felt like, beyond that, it just felt like such a, an incredible waste and, so sad for his parents.
Back in 1989, while God were on the verge of disintegrating, Joel Silbersher had his new band practicing in secret, a band called Hoss. Gareth Lydiard from the Drones is a big fan.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, I can't say enough, honestly. When after the God thing, he did Hoss, those albums like Do You Leave Here or something. Yeah, they're fucking amazing. And they're amazing in every way. Some of those Hoss albums are the best sounding records for me, rock and roll wise.
I think I've described it before as it's a casserole of all the hard-ass rock and roll shit that we like that has been going on for decades. Punk rock and Aerosmith and Black Sabbath and the Stones and noise music and just all squashed in and played hard and well.
So they put out the first album, Guzzle, and the first single, Green, on Ogogo, which I think stand up as fantastic records. And then they recorded another album, You Get Nothing, which came out on Dogmeat. I guess by that stage they were starting to become something around town. They could pull a really good crowd. They were getting big supports with Soundgarden and the like. They were playing the big day out. They would tour Sydney, they would tour Adelaide, Perth, wherever. But again, it never really translated into a kind of a national thing.
I think he's a really good songwriter, and I think it's a shame that no one's ever picked out, or he's never put forward perhaps, a song that stands out in a set the way My Pal did for God. I don't think he's ever written a song for Hoss that stands out from the other Hoss songs the way My Pal stands out from the other God songs.
that I know real love, and I'm out of my mind. I will be taken, 'cause the goddess has time.
You're listening to the story of God, my pal, and everything that came after.
Double J. That's Hoss with their song The Goddess Has Time from the 1999 album Do You Leave Here Often? Hoss is still Joel Silbersher's main band, currently featuring Scott Bailey on bass, Jim Svetsos on guitar, and Dean Muller on drums. They're the most straight ahead of all Joel's musical work since writing the classic song My Pal as a teenager. But there's a lot more to his songwriting. Andy Turner was the mixer for the band God and also wrote songs with Joel in his own band, The Sunset Strip.
Oh, I think Joel's one of the best, really one of the best songwriters Australia has produced. I think he's criminally not so much underrated, but even unknown in some quarters. His output, the diversity, he has an incredible imagination, an incredible diversity of talent. He can play bass, guitar, he can multi-track his vocals and sing fantastically. He can do weird, surrealist little things or straight-out balls-ahead rock and roll with Hoss. He's got the thing happening with Charlie Owen, criminally underknown.
And then, he did Tendrils, which is just genius. Dan Kelly was listening to that the other night. Just sitting in front of a couple of studio monitors just going, holy shit. It's just insane. It's so fucking good. And, it's not well known.
Based in blue, she said, I feel used by you. All I could say is I'm a broken down machine, not furniture. Necessarily, I know this is strange. Don't be afraid.
People think I'm a lot more serious than I am because my voice sounds like I'm serious. When I sing in that sort of sad, high kind of way, or when I'm barking like a dog, people think it must be some real angry kind of stuff, but quite often it's just to amuse me.
And then Joel did Greasy Lens, his solo album, which is just one of the best Australian things ever. It's insane, and it's impossible to describe. What sort of music is this? It's like, I don't know. It's just weird. It sounds like fucking a tsunami of musical equipment just sort of rolling to town in slow motion. It's bizarre. And then, the songwriting itself is incredible. It's completely weird. It's all back to front. It's completely wrong, but perfectly spaced out, timed well, and the lyrics are just like, what the fuck? He just comes up with the best one-liners.
Playing sweet, quiet music. I like to use that part of my voice. People were surprised that I actually had it in me. And then some people only like that. I really like your music. Why do you bother doing that Hoss bizzo? And then, of course, people who like Hoss will say the same thing about all the other stuff. I just have to go, I love you, fuck you all.
Instead I toast you now.
After making his mark as a teenager, Joel has produced over 20 years of incredible music. But it's the first good song he ever wrote, My Pal, that stands tall. And in 2010, Joel was asked to relive those days in God all over again.
New liquor licensing laws aimed at curbing alcohol-related violence in Victoria are having the unwanted side effect of forcing small venues to close or change the way they do business. The laws came into effect at the start of the year, but have already been blamed for the demise of one of Melbourne's most revered music venues, the Tote Hotel. The pub closed its doors last night after 30 years at the centre of Australia's underground music scene.
When it happened, I was certain it was the last night of the Tote. Well, we started with actually a little private memorial for Sean when we scattered Sean's ashes, actually on the sticky cup on the stage. And that was very, very moving.
It was a really, really unbelievable, powerful experience, actually. We got an invite, and then later in the day, Bruce actually presented Sean's sister with the brass plaques that was there to honour Sean in the hotel. He took it down from the wall and gave it to Kate.
I think Sean and all his bands, for all these guys, that was the Tote was kind of home base over the years, whether they kind of wanted it to be or not, It was the place that kept having them back, even if they were banned.
Used to jokingly say My Pal was the Tote's anthem, and when it came on the Tote jukebox late at night after the bands had finished, the front bar would... it was pretty magical every time it happened, I guess. Everyone just responded to the song.
With that Tote thing, the Tote was shutting down, or, and we were the last band on. And, everyone's sort of like, oh, Drones, they're a Tote band, but God, Hoss, Powder Monkeys, that is my idea of, that Tote sound. That sums up that little pub and that whole scene. And so we thought, let's finish the night with that. And then, we'd already played it with Joel 6 months prior, so he was open to the idea.
Joel Silbersher, this is our last song. This is the last song. It hurts to say it. This is the last song. Joel Silbersher, wherever you are, you are more than welcome to come now.
I wasn't sure that Joel was going to perform the way he did.